Stop me if you've heard this one before. Magneto is Malcolm X, and Professor Xavier is a stand-in for Martin Luther King. Have you heard that?
That's
Stop.
demonstrably true, right?
No, it's actually one of the many myths that exist about the X-Men and their early days and their origins. But what we do know is true is that certainly Stan Lee did originally intend for there to be a metaphor that the X-Men were standing in for. That, of course, being, yes, about race, but also about AIDS and some of the sexual, gendered issues that were happening during the Civil Rights era and that time frame. And I think it's certainly an interesting metaphor, but it's been 60 years since then. And, writers like Chris Claremont have taken the ball and really ran with it way further than what Stan Lee could or was willing to do at the time. But now, again, 60 years removed, does the idea of 6 or 7 or however many white regular dudes and women work as a metaphor for race relations or even sexual gender relations in the United States?
Well, Sean, we got blue X-Men too, and we got some pink ones and some globby ones. Surely that's got to be enough now.
They come in all colors.
Right. Yeah.
I don't even see colors this point. I only see mutants.
Muties.
Whoa, hey.
But it's a little ridiculous right now that the idea that Jean Grey, who I love to death, is running around still talking about how she's oppressed. Like I get it, right? I get that technically by the letter of it, if someone knew she was a mutant, they would hate her, but she doesn't experience racism or whatever phrasing you want to use as a lot of other mutants who would better represent the cause to us, the reader.
If anything, Jean Grey is an interesting example because I feel like most of her story is now directly not that. It's about her as a woman and her relationship with the men and the men mutants, and it kind of loses that whole analogy that she originally was. Not to say that the current storytelling for her isn't good and direction in discussing that of her as a woman isn't good, but it's gotten away from the original point of the X-Men that Stan Lee had, and I think that is missing in comics. Because there's no need, in my opinion, to hide it behind a mask anymore. You can tell those stories.
I feel like the most direct thing you would apply that to now are the Morlocks. Like that's like the best, I think, example of a version of the mutants that can still be despised to some degree. Like there's still going to be a group of people that are going to be like, mutants, you guys suck because you're mutants. But I feel like most people are going to be like, oh, yeah, okay, cool. Like, oh yeah, Horse Girl in my class is, she's cool. She's a mutant. We hang out sometimes.
You mean in the comics world or real life? Because we can clearly see in the actual Uncanny X-Men book that is not how people feel.
It's not, and I feel like that's past. That's like we've seen that enough where that othering and that being different because you're a mutant feels like it's not opening a conversation for tolerance. And I don't think that the intolerance angle for mutants, in my opinion, is needed anymore. Or you can go past that.
You're saying needed, not exactly like it's still in the text, like that's indisputable. But you're saying it's unnecessary to tell that story.
Yeah, we've had it. You can obviously keep telling that story, right? But I think for me, that angle of it is no longer interesting. It's the reason why I loved the Krakoan era. They were on top. They were looking at themselves as different. Yes, they were sort of removing themselves from the Marvel universe and being isolationist. But that was a more interesting way to go about the fact that they recognizing that they are different and they're taking that ownership of that.
But they still experienced, like, the core tenet of all that was hatred. And the primary antagonist was, humans that hated them.
For sure. And I think you can take, but I still think you can take the elements of, to some degree, a bond for unity. I think there's other stories that can be told within the bounds of X-Men that don't have to be based off of, we're hated by humans or hated by robots or whatever.
So you don't think that there is a need for that, for the representation of that today?
I don't think so.
Wow. Go ahead, Tyler.
I think that it is a perfectly fine story to tell, and using the X-Men as a funnel to tell race relation stories. But I think you need the characters and the creatives to be able to tell that story in the right way. There has never been a black writer of a mainline X-Men book, Uncanny or X-Men. Closest is Fabian Nicieza, who is Argentinian, so a person of color at that point. There's never been a black writer, which seems insane to me in the year 2024. Vita Ayala, they wrote New Mutants during the Krakoan era, but all those X-Men and Uncanny X-Men books were written by mostly white people, mostly white men. So I think that is a fundamental issue with trying to tell these stories, because there's no POV creatively that can tell that story from a lived standpoint. And that's something I want to see. If you're going to have the mutants hated in the grander scheme of the Marvel Universe, I want somebody who can speak to that from a personal level if possible. As shitty as that sounds that they have to, that would be more compelling to me.
You want the hate to be, or the discussion around that to be more nuanced.
I guess, but like I also wanted to be on the book. It was subtext when Stan Lee wrote it. And we didn't get prominent black, X-Men until what, Storm, really? So 80s. And even then, it's just like, I love Cyclops. Sean, you love Cyclops. When is besides Storm, when has somebody led the X-Men who's black? Like we were so close with Sync, being a prominent X-Men member during Jerry Duggan's run at Krakoa, and as soon as that's over, he's gone. He's coming back in a secondary title as a guest role, it seems.
Background character.
Yeah, it's always the POV character that is in the book for a writer's run and is gone when that writer's gone. There's no lasting things there. So I think that this dichotomy can still work in comics to tell a story about race relations, but I just don't think it's been done that well.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough because on the one hand, I would much rather, I would like to see that story told um for about characters who fit the bill a little more as the
Yep.
real world allegory, but at the same time, the point is that in that world they're mutants, so they're all dealing with that struggle, whether it's a Jean Grey or a Beak or a Sink or a Bishop. So it's a tough tightrope. And I know there are a lot of X-Men fans who, there are a lot of X-Men fans who kind of just want them to be superheroes and don't necessarily want them to deal with the plight of mutant kind. But I think if you're gonna have the X-Men, they have to be materially different than the Avengers. And the Avengers are a generic superhero team. They exist because there's superheroing that needs to be done, and they're the ones that are going to do it. The X-Men exist specifically to be a force of resistance and protection for other mutants. And yes, a force of good in the world, representatives of mutants to make mutants look good. We saw Astonishing X-Men by Joss Whedon and John Cassaday kind of not try to remove, well, they just didn't really deal with it. Like the whole mutants as that whole deal. There was the Cure first arc, but after that, they left that shit behind.
Yeah.
That's a very celebrated run. People love that run.
And the current trajectory of X-Men books is exactly what you say. From the Ashes is clearly just setting up the mutants as individual superheroes. Sure, there's the underlying anti-mutant discrimination going on, but all the solo books, they're just doing superhero shit in superhero ways.
Storm's book deals with the way that people view mutants right now. I think they are paying lip service to it, but it's just the status quo of mutants, and so it has to be there. But it doesn't feel like there's anything to say with it because it doesn't feel like it's being thought about particularly deeply. So for me, it's like if you're gonna do it in a way that feels like we're not spinning our wheels. I know we're always gonna do this song and dance, but I do think there are different dances we can do.
Well, when is the year where uh minorities will become majority in America? There's that whole
Right.
conversation, like 2045 or something. Um, like I'm interested to see the story that happens there. Like what happens reflective of that when the minority majority is born, and how do people take that position? How do people own that position of power and responsibility?
That's when Angel starts complaining about his whiteness.
Marco, I think though that the Krakoan era in a way dealt with that concept because the mutants were the majority, not in the world, but unto themselves.
Right.
And we saw the ways in which sometimes they overused their power. Sometimes they turned on each other, like what they did to Sabretooth, throwing him in the hole. Like there were interesting observations in that era about what you're talking about, for sure. And I mean, it's another reason why, I think there could have been more explored in that area that we just didn't get to.
Yeah, agreed.
They had a whole planet,
Like what is that? What does that mean for like? And they at no point did Hickman touch the Morlocks. I was waiting for some kind. I love
he
the
didn't.
Morlocks, dude.
Some of the tertiary books did, but
Yeah.
few and far
weren't
between.
weren't they like in like the desert or something?
They had decided not to go to Krakoa.
Right. But they had made like their own reservoir, like reserve or something.
Yes. Yeah.
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 Now they're just back in the sewers in NYX, so they love the sewers over there.
It's gotta stick with the alligators.
We'll leave it there. This isn't a condemnation, certainly, of the X-Men. I love the X-Men. I love my white X-Men. I love my green X-Men. I love my black ones. I love them all. But I do think that there is some evolution in storytelling that's possible, and I do wonder whether or not they are utilizing this metaphor to the best of their abilities. But that's up to us. That's up to the stories that they're going to tell and up to our judgment. So let us know what you think in the comments. Does this metaphor still apply? Does it still work in 2024? Racists need not apply. We'll see you in the next one. Take care, guys.
See you next time.